Hi, Dr. Creamer. This is a short presentation on my GT logic diagram. So basically, in this process, what we started with was sampling, and it was purposeful sampling. So we chose the participants or the scenes really in the movie that we wanted to observe and collect data on. So next in the process, we took field notes and we did embedded memoing. But initially, what we did before Antwon Fisher and before Good Will Hunting is we observed the setting. And so, with the volume off, we looked at the setting, we took notes, and then we proceeded to collect data and take field notes and include those embedded memos. The next thing that we did was we did open coding. So basically, we took the language of the participants in our study and we took short descriptions using ing words. And basically, this was the first step in making decisions about those categories, those conceptual categories. And we did this open coding line by line. The next thing that we did is and this, for me, this was part of the collecting data too, was the embedded memoing. So this analytical, this reflective reaction to the participant stories or to Will's story and to Antwon's story in the movies. So the next thing that we did was focus coding. And with focus coding, I looked at basically I was making a decision on these final initial codes in order to categorize my data. So I looked at all these codes that I came up with from open coding, and I tried to narrow down where maybe some of these extra codes might fit into one initial code and try to narrow down basically these codes with focus coding. So the next thing that we did was axial coding, and the way axial coding works basically is you're putting the data back together by making connections between the categories and the subcategories. We considered our conditions when we were looking at axial coding, and I remember we did this in class because we worked with our partner and we had sticky notes. We had this big piece of paper where we were looking at our focus codes and kind of trying to make these connections. We were looking at under what circumstances that does this occur, etc. So the next thing that we did was we worked on our coding dictionary, and George and I worked together on this. But basically, we worked on our coding dictionary with our strategies. We looked at our strategies and our outcomes. So after our coding dictionary, which we ultimately kept coming back to, but we developed our GT model, and then of course this logic diagram from that. So with the GT model, what we included was the causal mechanism, the phenomena, the strategies. We looked at the intervening conditions, the context, and the outcome or the consequence from the ground of theory. We also looked at the negative case, and in my case, the negative case was looking at that scene where Will met with the psychologist. I think his name was Henry, and Will didn't really, he went into the session, and of course, Henry, the psychologist, was a typical kind of psychologist where he wanted to just get right to the root of the problems up front and not really assessing the type of person that Will was. This was a negative case. It didn't, because it didn't fit into any of the established conditions that I had already looked at when coding and looking at the scenes from Good Will Hunting and Antwon Fisher. So that's why it ended up being a negative case. And then the last step is theoretical sampling. And I forgot to mention too that between open coding and theoretical sampling, you're constantly comparing pretty much everything. You're looking at your codes, you're going back to your dictionary, you're looking at your matrix, you're looking at your categories, you're seeing where things need to be tweaked as you continue to look at other cases. So where we looked at the cases or the scenes in Good Will Hunting versus the ones in Antwon Fisher, we're constantly going back and comparing what we have and trying to figure out what fits and what doesn't, and taking things out or maybe adding things in. Okay, so what I was saying about theoretical sampling is basically we're choosing new cases to compare to the ones that we've already studied. So we're looking at basically, you know, the cases with Good Will Hunting, the cases with Antoine Fisher, and then we're looking at new ones to see if they really compare, they match up. We can use it as a type of data triangulation. Basically, we're looking to compare to um, these, others with theoretical sampling. And one way that this was done in class, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is we were looking at other GT logic diagrams in class, and this is the part that I miss, where one person or a few people might have presented, and then we were supposed to discuss where ours matched up or didn't match up for triangulation. So the next thing that I want to kind of talk about, and I know this was done in class and I missed out on this, was the intensity matrix. And so this is my intensity matrix, and basically the matrix is used to ensure validity. It helps provide evidence of the patterns that I'm seeing and the relationships that I observe in Good Will Hunting and in Antoine Fisher. But it also needs to support the grounded theory that I produced. And it really did. So looking at this intensity matrix, it showed that the strategies of establishing rapport, asserting authority, and confronting worked to move the client, which was Will and Antoine, from resisting the process where they didn't want to do it initially to really interacting and engaging in the process, which they ended up doing. So it really does show, and you can see under establishing rapport where it was pretty consistent where my X's were. And then you'll see that I've grayed out this part under strategies, which was displaying emotion. George and I worked together partially on this too, but displaying emotion showed up towards the end in the last scenes in Good Will Hunting, but none of that showed up in Antoine Fisher. So that had to be thrown out, and that's why I have it grayed out. We did see asserting authority in Good Will Hunting and in Antoine Fisher, and then confronting. So basically where the counselor pointed out to the client things that were going on, or how they, the counselor made an effort to help the client see how they needed to change their behavior. And then you can see with resisting the process, where initially in both Good Will Hunting here at the top and in Antoine Fisher here at the top, in the initial scenes where the client resisted the process, but that you can see later on where they started engaging in the process. So here, part of the way through, maybe in scenes like 3, 4, 5, right? And then down here again with Antoine Fisher, where he started engaging in the process. So I hope this helps in my presentation. Absolutely, if it doesn't, if you need me to come on campus and talk about this in person, I don't mind doing that, and I really appreciate your consideration in this. I really apologize. I feel extremely guilty. I can't really control being sick, but I feel really bad for missing the last 2 classes, and I did want to let you know that my students did really well in Baltimore for that competition that I had to go with them and attend. Unfortunately, they didn't win. But they did get a certificate for being part of the competition, and our school gets a plaque for being in the competition this year. So that's something, right? And it was a good experience for them. So anyway, thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.